welcome to this webinar in our webinar series. I'm really excited that we have a guest presenter today. My name is Linda Ray and I'm the CEO of NeuroCapability and working very hard to change the world one brain at a time. And as I've said to for some of you on the call a little bit before, I'm excited because I get to be in the back seat, and I'm going to pass the baton to Wendy, who's going to take you through this webinar looking at this concept of feedback. And Wendy is an organisational development consultant of about 20 years and worked with both large and small organisations over that time. She's got qualifications in strategic HR and organisational psychology. She is also one of our alumni of our Neuroscience of Leadership programs, and we collaborate quite closely together. So you'll be seeing some co-work that we're doing together emerging in the future. So I'm going to pass over to Wendy and remind people to stay on mute unless you have a question, and we will be monitoring the chat pane and pausing at different times. We'll go through till 12:45, and if you have a question that hasn't been addressed, please stay on and we'll stay on till 1 o'clock. So I'm going to pass over to you, Wendy.
Linda,
welcome.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute privilege to be able to be part of this webinar. And the reason it's such a privilege is because I spend my days with leaders on the ground, as Linda said, big and small. And this is the one thing that they seem to struggle with consistently in their role. So what I get is leaders going, oh, I can't give feedback because they won't take it well. Or I can't give feedback because I don't know what to say. So when I put my head to this as a consultant and said, how do I make leader work easier? Because leader work is the hardest work I think you will ever do. Doing your technical work is far, far easier. But we know that for a leader to do their work completely, you need to have the technical capability. You need to understand why you're there in your work. You need to understand the commercials, of course. But all of that is driven by the social process. So what we're going to talk about over the next 45 minutes is the social process that goes behind feedback. Because the content is normally okay. It's the delivery that goes a little bit awry for leaders. And they really struggle to do that bit with assurance. So what I call humbly assertive. So we've got inquiry in our mind, but we've got a bit of a backbone to it. We're using our heart, so the backbone and heart. So when we think about feedback as a whole, it's well worth thinking, what do I need to do and how do I need to do it? Because at the highest level, feedback for me is about changing behaviors. Why would I give someone feedback? You know, there's high level reasons why I'd give that, and we're going to explore that today. But in essence, what is the true intent of giving feedback? And the true intent is to change something, behavior, generally, action. You know, I want something to change. And there's one of my favorite neuroscientists is Frances Frey. And I wonder if some of you have come across Frances Frey. So Frances Frey is a Harvard business professor. And she has a line in one of her TED Talks when she's talking about building trust. And that line is, the beautiful trait that human beings have is redemption. We can be a better person tomorrow than we were yesterday. And that proposition excites me because that tells me that I'm not fixed. We know plasticity occurs. We know that we can grow our brain. We know that we can absolutely be different tomorrow. So I'd like you to put that lens on as we travel through feedback and why feedback is so critical for us. Because you might feel that as a leader or as a consultant, as a CEO, that feedback is something that you're not good at yet. So I'd like to travel on this journey with you for 45 minutes around how you can deliver feedback well when you understand the neuroscience of it. I'm very blessed to understand through my journey the HR systems component, to work with the org site component. Those two in their own right do help leaders create very good systems, but it's actually the neuroscience that brings it all together from a process perspective. So that's kind of my journey with you today. So with your permission, I'd like to chat to you about what's going on in your brain when we give feedback. How do people respond? What are the ways that people can respond? And the impact of our language, the impact of what we're saying. And then what I'd like to do is wrap up with a couple of tools. So I've got 3 tools of leadership to go in your toolkit. And they're very context driven, of course, and they're very individually driven. So one thing you will have done, you'll have noticed over previous webinars, if you've managed to hook onto any of Linda's before, she says no 2 brains are the same, and absolutely right. So context is everything. And what I find fascinating when you put a neuro leadership lens on feedback is that you realize that feedback is fundamental to us. We need it. We can't develop and grow without it. But it can be delivered in such a way that causes us social pain. It can actually cause us to hold back and actually get what we call protective. Now, when we're in protective stance, we actually make decisions that hold us back. And that's completely the opposite of what feedback is striving to do. For me, feedback's striving to help us grow and change and be better. So if we want people to be motivated and engaged, if you want people to make the difference that we're looking for, whether that be a compliance standard, whether that be a change project that you've got, whether it be a behavior, we've got to know what's going on for them. And we've got to know what state they're in. So we weren't born demotivated. We were born quite motivated. So how do we keep that motivation? How do we keep that engagement? How do we keep people wanting to be and be productive in our organization? And feedback is one of our tools for doing that, but it's all about the process. Now, this won't be new to a lot of you on this webinar, but it's well worth just having a quick look at it as a foundation to why feedback can go so very right and go so very wrong. The brain has 3 organizing principles. We're coming to understand this as we get more and more neuroscience data and research come to the table. And it's very exciting to be part of an emerging science that helps us understand how to get people really to reach their potential and how to get them to drive performance. And if you look at prediction, the brain is wired to give us some certainty about a situation. So you wake up in the morning and it can pretty much predict the toothbrush is in the toothbrush holder where you left it last night. So you don't have to even think about where the toothbrush is. You can pretty much predict that the dog's going to want walking and the dog's going to want feeding. It's a routine that we get into. But unfortunately, our predictions aren't always as accurate as we would like them, because what they don't take into consideration is the change in context. So you might be walking into a work environment that's different, but your brain hasn't registered that and it's ready to behave in a particular way. Let's talk the language of survival. It's ready to behave in either minimize threat or maximize pleasure or reward. So when it's had feedback in the past, the feedback that you've had has either been a pleasurable experience that's helped you learn and grow, or it's been quite a damaging experience, which has meant that you withdraw from feedback. So my brain is wired at this state to tell me whether to move forward or to move away. That is actually really fundamental to understand in our own brain first, and then in the brains of the people that we're giving feedback to. Because if we have a brain that's actually wired to not like feedback, that in the past feedback has been delivered in quite a threat-based way, so not productive, it's been protective for me, there's a pretty good chance that I'm going to shut down and I'm not going to hear what you have to say. I'm certainly not going to problem solve it, and I'm certainly not going to collaborate around action plans. I'm certainly not going to move forward and say, what do you want me to do and how would you like me to change? I'm actually going to come in on myself. And you'll see that in a moment when I go through the brain. So we know it's a fundamental need. But the way that we deliver it in terms of prediction means that sometimes we have to change that prediction because it could be erroneous. It could be wrong in ourselves, or it could be wrong in others. And while we're trying to preserve ourselves and make life really easy and effortless, we'll make a decision whether we need to pay attention or whether we need to stop paying attention. So that's our conserve energy. Is this important for me to listen to while my leader's giving me feedback, or is it not? So all of these things are going on in the background, and they can affect how effective our feedback is. So we know that those principles sit behind the whole process of feedback. And there's another principle that I want to set to you that sits behind our feedback. And this is the work of Ian McDonald. Dr. Ian McDonald's written an amazing book called Creating Positive Organizations. And it's based on systems leadership, meaning that there's flows of work through a business, technical, commercial, social. And it's the social flow that actually drives behavior, drives production, drives performance. And he proposes that there are 3 questions that we must understand in order to perform well. And feedback fits in so beautifully into this. So what am I supposed to do? That's the certainty, the clarity of my role. If I know what my job is, I know the accountability that I have behind my job, I know my tasks, I'm more likely to be certain in the way that I work towards them. So you're going to get some will with my skill. However, if you leave it at that, I'm kind of lost about whether I'm doing right or doing wrong. So the second question is fundamental to us. How well am I going? If I know that my my task that I'm doing is eliciting the right reward, so you're wanting that standard or you're wanting that behavior as a leader, I'm going to continue to do it. If, however, there's an absence of feedback, I'm led to believe that I'm doing okay, or I'm a little unsure. Now, neither of those are good states to be in. And if I had $1 for every time a leading hand or a supervisor has said to me, I have no idea how I'm doing, so I must be doing okay, because no one's come and told me otherwise. You know, I haven't received that pineapple recently. That's not a good place to be in for leaders. It's not a good place for team members. So as a leader, I believe this is part of your leader work. So if I know my job, my role, I know the standard you're expecting me to perform to, the quality and the quantity, and I know how well I'm going, I've got a pretty good idea where I'm traveling in your eyes as a leader. And I've got a pretty good sense of what I need to do to learn and grow. So please consider that as we travel through this, because this is actually really fundamental to know. And you might be listening and going, you know what, I don't know the answer to those questions. So I probably need a conversation with my leader to say, what are my 3 questions of work? Or you might be sitting here going, you know what, I haven't done that with my team. So this is a fundamental piece of work to do. I'm going to pause now because I've just proposed 2 quite strong concepts. One is the organizing principles of the brain, and one is the 3 questions of work. And I'm going to ask you, please, to just do a bit of a poll. Linda's going to put a poll up for me. And I'd like you just to answer this poll very simply. What do you use feedback for most in your organization? So when you're ready, click away. Do you use it to exit someone that's not performing well? Do you use it to clarify question 1, hold someone to account so they're clear on their role, which is your bottom one as well? Do you use it to recognize good performance? Or do you use it as part of, say, a 9-box capability matrix where it's about succession or advancement?
Just waiting on a few more people. We've got about half people have voted. If you can quickly hop on and vote, that would be fantastic. We're going to close it down in 10 seconds.
It's getting close. 21 and 24.
Okay, we're going to close it down now.
I'm conscious if you're on a mobile phone, it's a little bit tricky to do the polling. But I get really curious. I love to know what you're using it for from a systems perspective, because it drives the intent of feedback, and we can lose the two. So what do we got? We've actually got it for recognizing good performance, 33%. And then we've got a pretty even around the next three, about 19%. So succession or advancement, clarifying the role of a team member, holding a team member to account. And only 10% of you are using it to exit. So part of your development plan. So thank you for that, because that really gives me a really, really good idea what history has shown as well. So if you think about where feedback originated from, it actually originated in the US military, which is no surprise, given we had a lot of very well-trained leaders coming out of the military and coming into corporate life. So what we generally see is what the military does, we then kind of absorb into corporate life. And this is no different. And we've done it through performance appraisals, for instance. So performance appraisals originated as exits. Yeah, so it's no surprise that it's only 10% using it to actually exit, because we've moved a long way in that. We then moved in sort of 1960s. We started to see them used as advancement, so succession planning. Then we started to see them linked to reward. And it was in the early 2000s, and then moving into 2010 and onwards, that we're starting to see it linked to accountability. That accountability is then linked to reward, KPIs, KRAs, bonuses. So we've shifted the intent of feedback through our systems. And what I want to do is just ask you to think about the intent of your system. Is it still what it's used for? Or has it lost its way? I'm in organizations, I'm very blessed to be in organizations frequently, and most will tell me, HR or CEOs or owners or high-level leaders will tell me that their feedback systems that they have that are formal, like performance appraisals, are no longer doing what they wanted them to do. They've become tick and flick. Now, studies like Deloitte or Willis Towers Watson say exactly the same, that leaders are doing it to meet the need of a system, not to add value. So I ask you to just think about your own organization and the influence that you might have in that organization, to ask, is that the case? Because what's been really curious is they reckon about 38% of feedbacks given actually reduce effectiveness, make people behave worse or perform worse. About 41%, nothing, actually it's about 21%, nothing changes. And 41% will see some improvement. Not a great hit rate for a system that a leader might be using. So it's well worth asking, what's the process of our system? What's the way that I do this? So if we have a look, thank you for that poll, because that gives us some really good insight into what may be happening inside the brain. For those that have understand the neuroscience and those that have been on Linda's journey, either as an alumni or on Linda's journeys around changing one brain at a time, will know that there's two really strong states that we can put people into. So one is absolutely our protective state, where we walk away from the feedback. Now, we don't physically walk away. What actually happens, and I'm going to use some drawing here, what actually happens is we walk away inside our brain. We become protective, and we hear that. We know when someone's actually disconnected from us when we're giving feedback, because you'll hear them dismiss your feedback. You'll hear them disregard it, deny it. You'll hear them go into self-protection around their image. So what that sounds like is, it wasn't me, it's not my fault, he did, she did. And you get a whole load of language that is what in HR terms we would call below the line behavior. That's protective behavior. That is where the sympathetic system has engaged. Our cortisol level has increased, and we are hunkering down to protect ourselves. Now, when cortisol levels go too high, we actually come in on ourselves, and it shuts down the ability to problem solve. It shuts down the ability to draw on the resources of experience and draw on the resources of memory. Now, you want all of those when you're giving feedback, because you're asking someone to, what are you going to do differently because of this feedback? What are you going to change? Now, they're not going to give you the answer if their sympathetic system is through the roof, if their cortisol levels are too high. So what we're striving to do is actually create the productive look. So as leaders, we're striving to create a process of giving feedback that it's in the productive territory. So because we want people to actually move towards you when you're talking, and that requires our cortexes. Now, it might be anywhere of our cortex, anywhere along here, depending on the feedback context. But if we're actually playing in our executive brain, our thinking brain, there's so many names for this brain: the modern brain, the rational brain, the brain that's supposed to help us with our decision making, although we do know that our internal, commonly known as the limbic system, also helps us with our decision making. So if we want good decision making, we actually have to be in productive, because that way we're facing forward. When our brain is facing forward, it opens up the neural pathways where our cortisol levels are coming down, and we're actually feeling dopamine, feeling some oxytocin. Those neurotransmitters are actually really useful for us during feedback, because they actually say, what can I do? What do I need to do to change? And they're positive states. So we know, and for those that have done Linda's webinars before, this next slide will not be new, and I'll go fairly swiftly through. If the feedback I receive increases my sense of worth, and I'm not talking about only positive feedback, I'm talking about growth feedback. I'm talking about feedback that allows me to be bigger and better. Yeah. If it increases my value, I will see it productively. If, however, your delivery of your feedback belittles me, humiliates me, makes me feel less, so you diminish me through your language choice, then I'm going to take a hit to my significance. That means I'll go straight into protective. And you'll see that as you come do this through the SCARE model or CARES model. If you reverse it, get it right and you reverse it, you can actually give someone some really good clarity and certainty about now and into the future through feedback. Or you can absolutely shut them down and make them feel very uneasy and unsafe and insecure. You can give them choices and freedom and influence through your feedback. Yeah, you can ask them what they believe, what do they think, or you can tell and shut them down. So you will have heard language like humble inquiry, being humbly assertive, and that's what comes into play here as a tool in the toolkit of leaders. When a leader uses humble inquiry, which is Edgar Schein's work, you actually get some really good ownership around the change of behavior that you're looking for. So autonomy is critical, the sense I've got some control over my life and what I'm doing. And then relatedness. Feedback can isolate me from my tribe, or it can include me in my tribe. It can offer support, or it can put me, for those English people in the on the webinar, you can send you to Coventry, which is a very English term. So if you've ever been sent to Coventry, it doesn't feel real good. It just means you get isolated and you're outside the tribe. And that puts me very much into protective territory. So my feedback that I give as a leader needs to make you still feel very much at the tribe. You might be receiving a pineapple. You might be receiving some quite strong corrective, but I still feel part of this family. So just because you tell your daughter or son off, or your niece or your nephew, doesn't mean they're not part of your family. They still are. Yeah. So work is no different. And then the one that we learned so very, very early in the sandpit, equity or fairness. Feedback needs to be delivered fairly. and this is fundamental, if I sense that the feedback you're giving me is unfair through my eyes, my perspective, I'm going to shut down. If, however, you articulate it in such a way that I am seeing it as fair, I'm actually more likely to be productive. I'm more likely to be in tell me more, what can I do mode. So it's really, really interesting to put that lens on. Now, Linda, I'm just going to pause here for a minute before I go to the next one.
Yes.
Any questions?
We've got probably some comments. Loving that that love, that growth mindset that you used initially. Another comment, we really use feedback to bring awareness to behaviour.
Yes.
And then kind of a question from Meg talking about, or a comment actually, imagine if leaders had conversations with new team members about their past experience with feedback.
Oh, yes.
And setting the scene on how together they can give each other feedback to be productive, not protective. And that, I think that's a really useful comment. And we often don't have those conversations with people to find out what their preferences are for how they get feedback. And I'm sure you're going to touch on this in a little bit later in the webinar. A bit of a kind of an insight or reflection. Interesting that the polls, leaders often say they mostly give feedback on recognising good work, but team members often say they do not get enough positive feedback. So why the mismatch?
Oh, that's a great one. In fact, I had an example last week where I was, a team was saying, I never get praised. I never get recognition. The week before, the owner had come down and praised them, thanked them himself, and given them each personally a hamper. And you just go, how did you miss that hamper as being a thank you for all your hard work? You didn't, the link wasn't made. And that's the prediction. You know, this is actually us saying, well, you've never done it in the past, so you're not doing it now. But the leader's working very hard on appreciation and fairness and making sure people feel loved. He's working very hard on the psychological safety, but no one's seeing it. It's fascinating. We take a long time to shift. So Meg, I love that, because the context is everything, isn't it? It's so important. So important. So thank you, Linda.
One last comment, being open with members and receiving them and treating them as you'd like to be received shows a lot about yourself as a leader. Lovely.
Oh, certainly. And I'm going to put a tiny caveat on that, because I love that. And the caveat is coming. So thank you for that piece, because you're absolutely right. However, the caveat is, it is not about you. It's about their brain, not your brain. So I often hear some quite strong leaders, autocratic leaders, say to me, I treat people like I want to be treated. I'm going, yeah, that's why you have the team reacting in the way that they do. So that's a small caveat that goes with that just says, be super careful around your perspective, that you get what we call shared perspective. So here's just a couple of pitfalls that I've experienced over time. So when I'm working with leaders, I find they can carry a confirmation bias. So what I'm saying there is they have a view and they go looking for others to share that view. So when they give feedback, they're able to say, everyone thinks like that. And of course, that's not what feedback's about. This is about getting into a very close interaction, team leader to team member, that's honest, sincere, and authentic. It's not about what others think. So we don't go looking for confirmation, go looking for curiosity, go ask, go, when you're with that team member. Otherwise you fall into that and then you end up having a conversation that goes hostile. We talked about my perspective. It's perspectives in many across. So the work that we've been doing around self-transforming leaders helps massively here. Because if you're a self-transforming leader, what you actually do is embrace all perspectives. You're curious about how they might be feeling or thinking, and you bring that on to help you guide your conversation and where it travels. This is an age-old one, timeliness. Yeah, we wait to quarter, we wait for the month end, whatever it is, and it's gone. The moment's gone. So the best systems that I've seen are ones where you give feedback now. You do it. Placement's very, very important. David Rock will tell you placement and seeking permission, very, very important. But timeliness is of the essence. Feedback is best done in the moment or very quickly after. And it's done courageously, not cowardly. You are the leader. You are the advisor. You are the peer mentor. And you're giving that through your lens with courage. Seeking permission is a really interesting one. When you're giving feedback peer to peer, you can't just bowl in and give feedback. And all of you will know that. It doesn't go down well. So we need to ask permission that someone's ready for it or wishes it. However, when you're in a team leader to team member relationship, you still need an element of timeliness around that permission or placement around that permission. You don't need to seek permission to give the feedback because that's your role to give feedback. But it's still very important to consider where and when, and are they in a good headspace to take it? You don't delay it, but you make sure it's the right time. So very, very important that leaders give it. So the team member can't say, oh, I don't want it, thank you. Yeah, because it's part of their work. But what they do have to say is this a good time, or where shall we go? Yeah, I often, I work a lot in manufacturing and production. So in areas where we're making things or we're disassembling things. And it's often site-based. So the leader will just grab the person they're wishing to give feedback and they'll jump in the ute. It's a safe space. So it's very, very, you've got to really consider your timeliness, your placement, you know, the location piece. All right. So some of you may well have seen this little fella. And I've just drawn some arrows because I'm just going to flash it up super fast. But to me, it's super important. There's a phase to feedback. When you're giving people feedback on something you've held them to account, there's a little check that I think leaders need to do. And that check is, do they have the skill to do that work? Sometimes I see people held to account in organizations and receive feedback in an unsafe manner. So they're being held to account for work they don't know how to do. So I put this one up here and I've underlined mastery because mastery is the start point for me. If they've got mastery and you're sure that they're competent, then you can hold them to account. Then you can have that conversation, which is around shared purpose. Now, for those that understand psychological safety, you know that's sitting in the middle. That's why the arrows are coming in. This really drives productive conversations. So I flash maps up as a model, Linda and Alex Glassey's model, because it's to me very, very important that from a fairness perspective, you're not holding people to account for something that they have no influence, control, or skill over. All right, so back to another poll. I would love to know, please, have you ever had a productive feedback experience? Yes or no? So when you're ready, oh, look at that.
Another couple of seconds and then I'm going to end it. Going, gone.
Gone. Overwhelming, yes. So that's telling me that it's possible. Every leader has the ability to actually deliver productive feedback if they get the process right. The reason I raise that is I have had leaders say to me, it's not possible to give corrective feedback or constructive feedback productively, but you can. You absolutely can. And it's about knowing the individual that you're giving it to. So here's another poll, and this is your lucky last poll. I would love you to tell me why. Why was it a productive experience?
think this one's got people thinking a little bit, Wendy.
Yeah, it does. It's very complex, this particular facet of leader work.
Okay, I'm going to give another 10 seconds.
Yeah. It's looking fairly balanced at the moment.
It is indeed.
That tells us something.
Okay, I'm going to end that and share the results.
Thank you. We've got process was productive. The way they delivered it was useful for me, which then tells me, 26, that the content was relevant. It was timely and it was pitched at the right level. So thank you. That gives me a really good insight to the next slide. So if the process is productive and it's pitched at the right level and the content is relevant and it's timely, we can do this. We can absolutely do this. And there's some science behind this, of course. So the science behind this is getting the right feedback at the right level to the right people. And this is something that really surprised me when I was looking at this from a neuroscience lens, because coming from an HR background and coming from some org psych knowledge, I was kind of going, oh, one size fits all, this is our feedback system. But what I missed, which I've come to understand through the neuro lens, is that it's right time for right people, for right brain. So if somebody's in a consciously incompetent, that's where the skill is low, but the will is high, I have to deliver feedback in a more positive way. My feedback is more what we would call praise or recognition, because I'm wanting them to get a foundation of what they can do well, and I can build them up. Many, many times with our novices, our new people, we're very quick to tell them what they've got wrong. But all that does is they take a hit to their self-esteem. So what the science is telling us is that if we actually angle our feedback in these 4 areas, so what do you think went well? What do you think others might have been impressed by? How can you build on that? And what are areas that you need to focus on? We're actually building some significance. We're building some certainty. We're building some beautiful relatedness into that. Now that's perfect for our what the science says is novice, our new team member, or someone doing a new skill. So it can be a highly competent. So if any of those of you know Blanche's situational leadership, it's people in that need your directive style or your coaching style. So you've got high direction and then moving up into high support from low support. But what the science is telling us is that's not actually useful for people that are already competent, that already are really good in their role. Telling them they're great and they're doing awesome and they're better, that there's nothing more they can do, is actually not useful for them to answer the 3rd question of work, which is what can I do to learn and grow? What more can I do in my future? So if you've got a team member in front of you that is already competent, they want to know what more they can do. They're not looking for praise. They're looking for constructive, give me more. So please have a think about that as you travel through, because that's very contextual. No 2 brains are the same. No 2 people are in the same position with the same set of skills or level. So for me, that one's really important to consider. So there is absolutely a place for negative feedback. So there's 3 feedback models I'd like to just walk you through. So as I promised, I said I'd take you through the brain and I'd take you through the impact. Now we're just looking at the 3 tools that I like to use in the toolkit. So this is now sort of the process of delivering the content. And I use WRAP, Build, and RRR. So I design these because I need to have in my brain my little jolts, my little brain extenders, my little process or structure to help me get this right. So I'm not going in cold to a feedback moment. So wrap for me is where I'm saying thank you. So I simply want to say at the highest level, thank you from a big picture perspective, because I want them to know how impactful their work is, their behavior is, the actions of support or their actions through a supply line or their consideration, their conscientiousness, their kindness. It could be for anything. I want them to know how impactful it was. So I then, I give the reason and I tell them what they've attained through my lens. And then I leave it with a praise. So this is the simplest one. Now, the more you do wrap, the more you tell people in the team what you're looking for. So you're making a very clear symbolic statement that this is what I want from a standard perspective. This is what I want from a values or a behavior. The more you do this, the more that people see and feel what you expect, then they're more likely to behave in that way. And it reduces the need to do the corrective because they know with certainty what you want, what is a reward for you. Reward, I'm not talking about money. Reward in neuroscience is about moving towards, it's pleasure. It is something that benefits us. So that's wrap. The brain loves to be primed. So what I've done is designed my constructive feedback using an acronym that primes the brain. Build. So the prime of the brain says B for big picture. Again, no different to the wrap. Tell me if I'm giving feedback, if I'm receiving feedback, tell me where it all fits in the great scheme of things. Tell me how and help me understand what you know and what its impact is. So this bit up front is the tell piece for a leader to give. Then it goes into humble inquiry. It then switches to ask, because this is a two-way street feedback. This is the process of telling you the context, telling you the impact of what went wrong and what we need to do differently, and then asking, well, what do you think we can do to change? Because remember, I've got the brain in productive because I'm actually asking them, what do we need to do? I'm actually valuing their thoughts. I'm asking them to give me what they think. So I get to hear their meaning. And sometimes that gives me greater context. I might have missed something. And that's often the case, actually. I then move them into learn, well, what are you going to do differently? And then what is the approach we're agreeing to do? Now, the more you do wrap and build, the more you don't have to play in the last space. So the last space for me should be minimum. I would be, as a leader, horrified to be doing more than 10% of my time, my feedback time in this zone. If I've got my zone right in wrap and build, triple R is very, very rare for me. But the impact of not doing this is significant. So you'll have heard this in terms of courageous conversations, being assertive in conversations, and this is where this one comes in. So again, I need to be very clear about the reason for the feedback. I don't just launch into the feedback. I actually explain why. Now, this one's worked off kind of a phase in time. So someone might be rude or late. I've just used those as examples. If they're rude or late for the first time, I will ask them, why are you rude or late? And they'll tell me the traffic was heavy or my alarm clock didn't go. Yeah, they'll give me a reason that might be valid. They're late again. What we traditionally do as leaders, we just go and ask them, why are you late? So we're just repeating reason again. And they've got a really damn good reason why they're late. Yeah, and I can't argue that. So where have I got to go if I just keep asking them the reason? Nowhere as a leader. So what I've learned is actually to shift my conversation. So when they're late, I don't talk about them being late. I say you have a pattern forming that's impacting. That pattern is not useful. And I don't allow them the excuse. Now, if you're doing wrap and build regularly, you should know what's going on with your team members in their work life and their home life to some degree. There are moments, sometimes I get to this one with a particular team member and I have to stop. And the reason I have to stop is because they now tell me that they've got issues. They haven't wanted to tell me up to this point as a leader. They now confess to me, they now share with me that their wife has left, their husband's left, their son is in trouble, their daughter, whatever it might be. And this is where the feedback stops. And I move into a different tool in my leader toolkit. However, if the circumstances are not related to some issues or concerns that are mental health related or is really significant for you to know as a leader, it's actually they're just lazy or their care factor's low, or it might be something else that you need to deal with. They might be toxic. Then you are moving in. If they're late again, you carry on. Now you're building into relationship. This relationship here is a breach of our values. It's a breach of trust. It's a breach of our tribal belonging. This is all three of the feedback tools that I've shared with you today are pre any disciplinary. They don't form part of a formal disciplinary system. They form part of leader work on an everyday basis. If you get to the bottom of this relationship one and they're not shifting, that's when you move into disciplinary, because you've done all you can. So that's a completely different system that's continuing on. So that's my 3 feedback models. So wrap for when you want to encourage people and reward people for doing good work and really set a good standard. Build for when you need to put people into that priming to get more or correct them slightly and you need their input. And then 3 R's for when they are starting to behave in a way that is impacting deeply. Might be they're toxic, might be their pattern of behavior, might be their routine is not useful. So why do we do this? So I'm going to quickly do this and hand back to Linda, if I may. If I loop back 360, we're doing this because we're social creatures. We want to get feedback process right because we can hurt through social pain. We can hurt and stop people coming forward to learn if we put them into protective territory. We can make people feel isolated if we get it wrong. Flip that and we can get some amazing performance from people. Some people, moving into that awareness zone where people go, I didn't know that. So Johari's window, the arena gets bigger. So we are social creatures with a social organ. We need to belong. So feedback is one of our most valuable mechanisms to do that. So Linda, I'll end with the sentence which I love, which is, it's not what you say, not what you do that people remember, it's how you make them feel. And I believe that was Walt Disney. Am I right?
I believe it was, Wendy.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. A few people nodding, so I think you're correct. Thank you so much, Wendy. I know that I gained some little tidbits and new little insights. I love your models. I'm sure other people have found it really useful as well. I'm mindful that we're a little bit over time. So those people that need to hop off, thank you so much for joining us. I am going to turn to the chat pane because there are a few comments and questions that you might like to respond to.
Absolutely.
I think people are talking about being open with members and receiving and do unto others. You spoke a little bit about that. A nice one here. We can always assume that others have the same needs as we do. They hear and see information differently. So it's really about knowing individuals. Great comment. Can you have too much feedback? Great question.
That's a brilliant question. Right. Can you have too much feedback? I'm going to go back to context on that. So if you felt you're giving too much, it might be the context has changed or the process isn't right. It might, so from a giving it. However, from a receiving, it might feel too much because you're in protective territory. So it might be that you've got a repeating pattern that you're blind about, and the feedback's coming from all these sources and it's saying the same thing. And it might be you're in denial mode and it feels like it's too much, because the too much is what I'm curious about. So that one needs more explanation. You know, I need to explore that one a bit further before I say yes, no, because I think that's quite complex.
I think there's times when I've heard people talk about feedback being excessive when it's just praise orientated, and particularly when it's given to people that are not novice, they're more expert.
Spot on.
So then they go, they just keep telling me how great I am and I'm really over it. So at times I think that can be a challenge.
I think actually that's a really good point, Linda, because it's that's where the context is. If I have a leader that's already competent, please don't keep telling them they're amazing. Because that's not useful. So yes, spot on.
There's another, I love this one from Wendy. She said, micromanagers tend to give excessive feedback to guide people when in reality it's a process of control.
Very, very true. Very, very true. It's about the minutiae. And this is where the leader themselves need coaching as opposed to the team member. And this is where leader work cascades down. If you have someone with micromanager tendencies, they've got insecurity themselves. So that's where we do that piece of work to raise them up to their level instead of bringing them down.
And you'll tend to find people with giving that excessive feedback and micromanaging may have quite strong preferences for certainty.
Absolutely.
So it's really something to be mindful of if you know that that's a high driver for you.
Absolutely. And this is where work on self is critical. So if they can't self-regulate because they don't know that they're coming across that way, and if they don't know them, and this is where it all starts with neuroscience, it's knowing you, being curious about you and what your needs are and how that might be projected to others usefully or not.
Great point. So we've got lots of thanks Wendy, great, fantastic webinar. There's another question here. There are cultures that are overly friendly. May you comment on this with regards to giving feedback within the workplace? Is it safe to say less feedback equals less growth?
Oh gosh, that's a big one. So when we're talking cultures there, I'm assuming we're talking societal culture or ethnicity culture as opposed to workplace culture. Is that right?
They haven't specified. I think it could be either. Yeah.
Okay. Because when we have a look at the values that people hold as a core, one of the values that we hold is honesty. And where it can go wrong is when we go culture to culture. So when we go nation to nation. Yeah. So when we're in our own cultural norm, we accept feedback in the way that we're used to receiving it. But where we've got such beautifully diverse workplaces, feedback in my way might be quite hostile or might be too soft to where they've come from and originated. So that's a really complex one. I love that, and I need to unpack that more. So whoever gave that, if they want to talk more, because I do love that one, please email me or Linda, and we'll unpack that, because I think that's fascinating.
Fantastic. We've got 5 more minutes before 1 o'clock. Another lovely one here. How would you approach feedback at scale? In today's day and age, I'm finding I'm working on lots of workforce transformation programs, which requires care around redundancies, redeployment and capability. What's your approach been here? Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's a really useful lens to put on it. So if I can answer that, please, as an example. One of the very large organizations that I've had the privilege to work with, we were really struggling with the antiquated performance appraisal system. It just wasn't giving us the growth and the performance that we were looking for in people. People were quite disconnected with the system. So my lens is to look at the system and see where it might be faulty. We ended up throwing out that system on a grand scale. And we introduced a system. We gave permission to leaders and team members to seek permission on a Friday. So we called it Feedback Friday. What we were actually doing is small scale moving a whole organization to getting comfortable with this. On a Friday, you can knock on your boss's door and your boss is going to leave time for you. So we wanted to create a climate of safe conversations. And we knew over time, it wouldn't just be Friday, it would be Monday through to Friday that they would have these. And that's exactly what happened over time. So what you have to create is that direct relationship that was disconnected, because the leader is dealing with many, many issues across the day, of which dealing with the feedback is one of the many tools that they're using. So when you're coming at it at scale, you're playing with the systems, you're playing with the symbols that come from that system, you're playing with leader behavior. So it is multifaceted. It's a big piece of work. And we use, when we're doing that, we start with the context. Then we have a look at what's the climate within the organization for that. What is the organization's ability to collaborate, to harness the collective intelligence, and how resilient are they? So that's a complex, I love these. They're really, yes, each one of those questions needs an hour to unpack. Better?
That's better. Operator error. Thank you everyone for that has joined us. I'd really like to show appreciation to Wendy. I know there's wonderful comments. I think the feedback models really resonated with people as well, and great for you to share your knowledge and your thoughts with people. So thank you. We appreciate the time that you've given to us. Thanks for everyone that's joined us. We would love to see you on our following webinars. I'm going to be doing a session on questions, asking great questions. I'm fascinated by the use of language, and I think there's some really important things about how we move into that humble inquiry that Wendy referred to in this webinar. So thank you everyone for joining us, and look out for our next webinars. We're actually going to be doing a morning and evening one next week, as well as a midday one, to accommodate our people in the UK and America that are wanting to join live webinars. They're all asleep right now, so it's not a great time for them to be joining them. So thank you everyone. Have a wonderful brain-friendly day. Make sure you share these resources with as many people as you can, so we can change the world one brain at a time. Thank you.
Thank you.